Hello and a warm welcome to Personal Finance. I'm Gugulethu, Cele. Now today I'm joined in studio by Jeffery Wiseman, who is the head of Momentum Trust, for a closer look at what is needed in case of your untimely death and what you need to do for estate planning. Good to have you as always with us, Jeffery.
Good to be with you.
Unfortunately, it's that topic that we always like to ignore because we all think that we'll be young and live forever, but that's not the reality, unfortunately.
That's right.
Exactly. But if we touch the tip of the iceberg with regard to the importance of a will, I know Wills Week was celebrated in the month of September, but just remind us again of the critical importance of having a will in place.
So a will is a document that provides an instruction to your executor as to what must happen to your property when you die. And in South Africa, you can leave your property as you wish within certain limitations. And it's important that everybody who is economically active, so in other words, if you're working or if you have a job, you should probably think about getting your will in place.
Economically active, is this someone who's like you say, working, has certain amount of assets in place, despite the fact that they're not overwhelmingly wealthy?
That's something that is often said to us. People will say, I don't have anything, I've just started working, so why should I have a will? And the truth is that if you wait until you've got assets, you don't know when you're going to die. So it's very difficult to determine exactly when you should have your will drawn up. So the best rule of thumb is when you start earning money, at some point you're going to buy a house, you're going to buy a car. And so if something should happen to you and you've got your will in place, then at least it's there for somebody to know exactly what must happen to your property.
And I take it that's across the board regardless of what age you are. So even if you're 25 and still believe that you have a lot longer to live, getting the paperwork in place is quite necessary.
That's right. There's no harm to having a will. So anybody who understands what they're doing, if they're at least 16, you can make a will. And so look, if you're at school and you're not really working, perhaps it's not that important. But as soon as you start working, if you're 25, and you're working towards buying that car and that house and what have you, go and see a professional, get a simple will in place. It's not that expensive, and as I say, once it's done, you can put it in a safe place, make sure that people know where it is, because you don't want people to struggle to find it should something happen to you. But once it's done, then it's in place and you can review it from time to time thereafter.
Let's get to the critical element, which is where to start. And you mentioned something so important, is that find a professional and then take it from there. Where should one start when it comes to writing a will?
Well, there are three main places that you would look. Accountants or lawyers in the professions are able to help you, either one of those two professions, or trust companies, and they would often align to, let's say, a financial advisor, and they would employ professional people to assist with drafting competent wills.
On the detail that needs to be included there, what does this entail? Where I want my glass of water to go, my favorite mug, or does it necessarily have to deal with large, significant assets?
No, so our comment to many clients is don't make your will more complex than it has to be. So often the simpler the better. So if you have specific assets that you want to leave to somebody, let's say you've got jewelry that you want to leave to a child or to a sibling or something like that, then specify that in the will. But if you want your estate or the residue of your estate to go to somebody or to a group of people, you don't need to specify the assets one by one. We often come across wills that were executed many, many years before the person dies, and we still have to give effect to that. So if they'd listed all their assets in the will, it probably would have changed by the time that they actually did die. So for us, as I say, don't make your will more complex than it has to be.
I take it keeping it up to date as well is an important element, because people grow up, they get married, sometimes you have children, others get divorced, but life happens. And that's clearly a critical element that needs to be included in the will there.
That is right. So again, you should periodically review your will. Every year would be ideal, but if it's not every year, every couple of years would be good. But certainly every life-changing event. So if you have a child, if you get married, if one of the beneficiaries in your will passes away, if you get divorced, very important, because the law is quite prescriptive in terms of what happens on divorce. So it's important that there are major life events that do take place, that one should just have a look at the will and make sure that it applies to your circumstances.
Tell us about the divorce situation. What's the worst case scenario there, especially in a case where the couple was initially married in a community or property?
So what happens with divorce is if a couple gets divorced, the Divorce Act provides that the parties will be regarded as having predeceased each other for a period of 3 months following the divorce. So in other words, if something happens and the original will is in place, then the ex-spouse won't inherit for that 3-month period. But if you don't attend to the will within that 3-month period, then that presumption or that deeming provision will fall away and the ex-spouse may well inherit from you. So certainly very important that one should, if you are going through divorce proceedings, that one should look at your will, because something can happen either during the divorce negotiation before the divorce takes place and then the spouse may inherit unintendedly, or as I say, if you don't do something for after that 3-month period after the divorce takes place, then the ex-spouse might actually inherit from you as well.
Gosh, and that could lead to emotional turmoil as well, even more, right?
And practical difficulties. You know, often you will have an executor that's winding up a deceased estate and he will clearly see that this cannot have been intended, but it's contained in this document, and sometimes one's really placed in a very difficult position.
What about, just to sidestep for a moment, those who have assets in other nations or offshore outside of South Africa, can that also be located in a local South African will, or depending on where the jurisdiction of the assets that you own is actually in, would I need a will in the UK, for instance, or in the Americas, should I have assets there?
So often it's a matter of preference. In most instances, you can have a single will that can be used to attend to assets in other countries. Our advice, though, is that sometimes the succession laws in other countries are specific, and there are also different executorship or probate processes that need to be followed. And so if you do have a large or estate that exists outside of South Africa, it's not a bad idea to get professional advice in those jurisdictions and to make sure that you execute a will in that jurisdiction to deal with those assets. The chances are good that that professional will be able to advise you more competently in relation to the assets that are situated well outside externally.
Jeffrey, to come back to the topic about multiple wills, coming back to someone who's based in SA and has assets in this particular jurisdiction, is it ever advisable to have more than one will, or will the one with the closest date perhaps outweigh the older will?
So the answer to that is that it's generally speaking not advisable to have more than one will that would apply to a single jurisdiction, because that can only really lead to confusion. So it's a good question, because from a drafting point of view, as professional will drafters, what one would normally do is the first part of the will make sure that you revoke any previous wills that you've written, so that this will that you sign is the latest will that applies to your affairs. So if you don't have a clause like that, then we have to try and read the two documents together, which, as I say, can lead to confusion and certainly unintended consequences. So as I say, the best way to go about it is to revoke all previous wills and make sure that your wishes are contained in a single document.
Don't do that when you're emotional, I think. Otherwise, gosh, it could lead to even more trouble.
No, that's absolutely true.
Exactly. But coming back to wills and the establishment of proper estate planning, what are the cost implications and particular tax implications as well that one needs to bear in mind, or does that rest solely with the executor of the estate?
So what is important, getting a will drafted for you doesn't necessarily need to be that expensive, depending on the service provider that you go to. You get some wills, some providers will offer you wills for free, others will charge you 500 to 1,000 Rand, yet others might charge more. For me, I don't think the price of the will should be the guiding factor. I think what is important is to make sure that the person that's drafting the will is competent. The costs of winding up an estate, there are always going to be liabilities in an estate, and certainly I would say that it's important that when you have your will done, that you get somebody who advises you on your financial affairs to have a look at what will happen when you die as well. And the reason for that is that estates have liabilities. So that might be your executor's fees, there might be some transfer costs in relation to properties, you might have an outstanding bond on a house that needs to be settled. Those are all liabilities of the estate that must be paid before the estate can be finalized. And so one needs to understand where that cash is going to come from. So it can perhaps come from a policy if you're young and healthy and you qualify for life cover, or you might have to make some money or put some money aside to understand that that's going to settle the liabilities of the estate. So there are some costs associated. There will be a final income tax return that needs to be submitted, so there may be some outstanding taxes. There may be capital gains tax, and there may be estate duty. So again, one should have a look at the effect of all of those issues on your estate and make sure that you're adequately prepared for that eventuality.
Well, we've certainly said quite a lot in tonight's discussion. Let's get a quick recap on the key takeaway points. Jeffrey, the key considerations for viewers watching tonight to remember about writing and drawing up a will, what do they entail?
Well, I think the first thing is, as soon as you start working, take the time and trouble to go and get a will drawn up for you. Make sure that it's done by a competent professional. The second thing I think that would be important is make sure that you keep your will in a safe place and that your closest family members know exactly where it is. And then finally, all estates carry liabilities. Make sure that you know where the cash is going to come from in your estate to be able to settle those liabilities.
Exactly. Jeffrey, thank you so much for your time today and the wise words that you've shared with us when it comes to establishing your will. That's where we leave it for Personal Finance this evening. A big thank you once more to Jeffery Wiseman, Head of Momentum Trusts. Do remember that we want to hear from you, so feel free to get in touch. You can tweet any of your comments to @CNBC Africa using the hashtag Finance410 or to myself @Gugulethu on Twitter. Until next time, it's goodbye for now.